Hello and welcome to Make It Conscious. This is Max. Thank you for checking out this 7-part series, Beyond the Limen. This is intended to be an introduction to the technique of active imagination, rediscovered by the psychologist Carl Jung. It's a very important and powerful practice for inner work, for individuation, for self-knowledge. Even though Jung is often named as the person who discovered this technique, it's more accurate really to say that he rediscovered a technique. Talking to yourself, engaging with the deepest parts of yourselves, the unconscious mind, that's always been a part of the human experience, human practice, human ritual for as long as we've existed. However, it's also an art and a skill that we have sadly and sorely lost touch with, certainly in the last few hundred years. So Jung himself rediscovered it, built on the wisdom of the ages, and even though he benefited from it greatly himself and extensively reported his own experiences in like the Red Book, for example, he didn't offer that much by way of technique, formula, and many other thinkers since have done that. I'm doing that here too in this series, but this is very much intended to be an introduction to the practice of active imagination, to give you a taste of some of the benefits, to understand the raw power and the import and the value of engaging with your own unconscious mind, and to allow you to decide to what extent you'd like to take that further, perhaps engaging with your own unconscious mind in making that very decision. So it's very much an introduction, but one that I hope will contain great import and change you. If you pursue this course honestly, even if you've done active imagination before, I still recommend going through this short series. It follows a logical sequence and it covers a number of key areas relating to this practice. But it's also going to be a prelude to a self-study course being released called How to Talk to Yourself. So there will be an option at the end to continue studying, the idea being that you can go off on your own and practice unguided active imagination. Because even though the Make It Conscious YouTube channel now contains well over 100 exercises that are all guided exercises, unguided practice also plays a really key part in the pursuit of self-knowledge. So this will be certainly some foundation to that, but this course as well that's coming up will also serve to really tool you up in that specific side of the practice. So, welcome to Beyond the Limen. And day one here is called Greeting Your Soul. So we're just going to be taking a light touch today. But before we get to the guided exercise, I'd like to give you a little bit of a brief introduction to the practice and the thinking behind active imagination and where it sits. No doubt you've done some inner work. You've probably got interests in many facets of spirituality or any kind of self-knowledge practice. Where does active imagination fit within all of that? Well, it's quite curious and ironic, actually, because Jung himself believed that this is one of, if not the most powerful technique for engaging with the unconscious mind and for pursuing individuation, for becoming who you really are. Engaging with both our personal unconscious material and the collective material and deepening a relationship with it is absolutely vital to that whole process. And at the same time, it's a shockingly underutilized technique. Even amongst Jungian analysts, very many of them do not use active imagination. So I'm just going to go to a very brief quote by Jung, and he wrote quite extensively on this, of course. Not so much on the techniques behind it. He didn't offer much by way of a how-to, but he wrote extensively about his own experiences, and it's clear that he did also train his students and his patients in how to apply this technique. And he was very firm about this. He said in a letter in 1946 that if you apply this method, then I can come in as an occasional advisor. But if you don't apply it, then my existence is of no use to you. And Marie-Louise von France is on record as saying similar things, alluding to this fact that we can be our own spiritual guide, we can be our own priest, our own priestess. We have what we need to attain to wholeness, to understand ourselves, and to become who we are really capable of being. And other people all serve as guides in that process as well. But you see, even when we recruit a spiritual guide or a coach of some kind, it's on our own authority that we're doing that. And there's no getting around that ultimately. And that is a hurdle that must be crossed sooner or later. So Jung here is certainly corroborating that and saying, look, I may be the founder of the Association of Analytical Psychology and the person who coined the collective unconscious and the whole theory of archetypes, but even I can't help you if you're not doing active imagination. So that should give some idea of the weight that he applied to this particular technique. Paracelsus, the Swiss physician from the 16th century, said, I had the intention of making a thing which would have the power of making gold, but I made an accidental discovery of an elixir which could cure all diseases. Indeed, it brought me to the gates of death and to the gates of the spiritual life. So he was an alchemist, and by that point, it wasn't called active imagination, but as I mentioned, Jung really rediscovered this technique, and it's appeared in many, many different forms over the millennia. And what Paracelsus is saying here, I think is very applicable to the technique. I wouldn't go so far as to say it is a panacea. It is admittedly one technique amongst many, but it is a very powerful technique. And you may already be doing it in some form without necessarily realizing it or even calling it that. So active imagination is what I would class as a dedicated practice of inner work. So is meditation, so are the divination arts, so is tarot, dream work as well. You could also classify it as a dedicated practice of inner work. Insofar as when you do active imagination or any of these techniques, that is all you are doing. 100% of your intention in that moment is to make the unconscious conscious. You cannot say the same thing about driving a car or walking your dog or skateboarding. Some people may describe these things as meditative in some sense, but in this model here, I wouldn't really class them as meditative because the mind is not focused on that one thing. And there's a lot of benefit to focusing the mind on just one thing at a time. I sometimes liken this idea to, say, an Olympic athlete, an Olympic 400-meter runner whose job, if you like, is just to run 400 meters as fast as they can. But in preparing for that event, they're not merely going to just run 400 meters over and over and over again. They're going to be doing all kinds of different dedicated practices. They're going to be lifting weights, right? They're going to be sprinting some days 100 meters, other days they might just go for a really, really long walk. So this is a pretty useful analogy for why dedicated inner work practices are so important to self-knowledge. Now, it comes with a kind of catch, and the catch, if you can even call it that, is that it does not provide a way around your challenges or your issues or your conflicts. It provides a way into them and through them. There is no way around, but there is a solution to them, and that solution is to face them head on, is to make them conscious, is to resolve them, is to reconcile with them. So active imagination provides a way of doing that. So despite the power of this technique, it is relatively underutilized and unknown at this point in time. And there's some pretty understandable reasons for that. I think because, in large part, it takes effort, it takes will. But if you're serious about inner work and really coming to know yourself, if you have empathy, if you are concerned about your impact on other people, maybe even the state of the world and our Western culture or even global culture right now, the widespread avoidance of self, then it would follow suit that you're probably not afraid of going inwards. Well, it's understandable that you might be afraid. There's going to be some fear, but nonetheless, you're willing to confront that fear. And so this is definitely not a walk in the park. Active imagination can be very demanding, very challenging. In that way, it's quite different from Eastern style meditation, which is certainly demanding too. But this is a different kind of demanding. It requires more energy, more efforts. And in fact, the two practices complement each other very well. There's even actually a little bit of each in the other. A long-running practice of meditation will really help you with active imagination. And likewise, if you're just doing conventional Eastern meditation, there's a bit of active imagination lumped in with that as well, even if you don't call it that. You know, images will appear. You might encounter what appear to be beings, whether they be kind or malevolent. In active imagination, we're doing that deliberately. And we're engaging with, well, our own unconscious mind, with its elements of our own personal unconscious, the shadow, our own feelings, desires. We're coming to understand deep, deep facts about ourselves that we didn't know, that govern the way we see and behave in the world. And when these insights come, which they may not be guaranteed to come every time, but when they do, it's like a very direct import. It's like a lightning flash, and your whole frame can change. So you can really facilitate very profound shifts with this technique, which is why Jung described it as the vital second part of analysis and encourages patients to do it on their own. So you want to be on stable ground to do this. You have the choice to cease the exercise at any time. I will offer an appropriate level of caution. Active imagination itself cannot cause a problem in the mind, but it can catalyze an existing problem. So be aware of what is and isn't safe for you in your mind, but also understand that it is one's own fear and attitude towards their own unconscious mind that tends to produce difficult experiences in active imagination. So take a bit of cautious confidence and a bit of faith that whatever you experience in your own mind is something that you can assimilate sooner or later. Okay. So with that said, just going to invite you to take a position. You can do this exercise seated, lying down, or even standing up. As an introduction to this technique, seated or lying down might be preferable. Make sure you're comfortable, straight back, and just close your eyes. Just allow the mind to settle naturally. There's no rush here. It's a good idea to start each active imagination exercise with just some basic meditation. This just allows the various subconscious inclinations of mind to dissipate and makes accessing the unconscious mind usually a lot more fruitful. So just keep your attention on the breath for now. Choose a point wherever you feel the breath the most. This might be the sensation of the air moving through your nostrils, or the rise and fall of the chest or abdomen. it's very likely that the mind will try to wander at some point during the exercise, possibly many, many times. That's fine. Just bring the attention back to whatever it is you're doing. So just maintaining a very gentle focus on the breath. Almost like it's just reflecting and being received. And now, we're going to bring the mind to the imagination. So letting go of the breath for now. And imagine yourself standing in a moonlit scene at night. Imagine this as the place where your soul resides. There's no need to think about what that might mean. Just simply drop that idea into your mind. And first, just bringing this scene into your imagination. Take a moment to look around. Are there any salient features or symbols? And in this place, a figure begins to form. This is your soul. Just allow it to form naturally, without trying to edit or control it. It might take a while to settle down. That's quite common. Just allow it to appear in whatever way it needs to. No matter whether it seems strange and bizarre, or perhaps even obvious. Either way, just know it's forming in whatever way it needs to. And now examine this figure more closely. What is its overall expression and demeanour? What sort of clothes is it wearing? Is it moving? Or static? And notice how you feel in its presence. Where did this figure come from? What caused it to appear in the way that it has? This is your imagination, and it contains all the seeds of your future development. There will be plenty of time to converse and cultivate a relationship with all parts of yourself. But for now, just greet your soul. Introduce yourself however you like. Perhaps with a wave and a smile, or a few kind words. How does the figure respond? Do they return your warm greeting? Or do they seem distant, aloof, or even hostile? Do not worry if the figure doesn't respond the way you expected. In any case, it contains valuable insights and lessons. So just spend a little bit more time in this figure's presence. No need to say or do anything if you don't wish to. Just be with it, observe it, and notice how you feel around it. So, bidding farewell to the figure for now. And just allowing the scene to fade. Bringing your attention back to the space around you. This helps just to bridge the gap between the exercise and everyday life. So you might notice some sounds or physical sensations. Taking a deep breath. And opening your eyes again in your own time. So, well done, and hopefully you found that useful, insightful. I'm going to be building on this in the next several sessions, getting more involved in a two-way interaction. But for now, hopefully that's been a very useful introduction for you into this practice of active imagination. Hopefully it's given you some taste of how the imagination works when we proactively access it, and a sense of the power that it contains and the wisdom and the insight and the treasure. There are not many problems that cannot be at least served by this technique. You know, most of the challenges we encounter in daily life, personally, interpersonally, societally, these can mostly be chalked up to issues in the minds of people, right? Conflicts that exist in the minds of people between disparate desires, inclinations, the way we like to be seen, and the way other people see us, or aspects of our personality that we haven't fully brought on board. This very much relates to the topic of shadow work. Active imagination is key to shadow work, which in itself is a fundamental part of individuation more broadly. You cannot really do shadow work without active imagination at some point. So whatever the issue is, whatever the conflict is, this technique can potentially provide some insight into that and a way of facing it and working through it, embracing the feeling that's associated with it and making that conscious. So we're going to be going a lot deeper with this over the next several sessions. These are going to be released, by the way, not daily, although you can do them daily if that's how you prefer to do it. You can also have breaks. You can maybe meditate on off days or do some other kind of dedicated inner work. That's okay too. But set yourself a goal to get to the end of the series either way. within a reasonable time. Okay, I'll thank you for your time and attention and look forward to seeing you in the next part.